There is a specific kind of madness that society reserves for people who are right, people who see clearly, who speak accurately, who name the thing that is happening before anyone else has found the courage to look at it directly. People who stand in the middle of a crowd pointing at the smoke and saying, "There is a fire." And the crowd turns, not toward the smoke, but toward the person pointing and says, "You are hysterical. You are paranoid. You are difficult. You are mad. This is not an accident. This is not a failure of communication. This is a choice, a deliberate, psychologically motivated choice that human beings make collectively and individually when the truth being offered to them is more threatening than the comfort of refusing it." The Greeks had a word for this. They built it into their mythology because they understood it was one of the most fundamental operations of the human mind. Her name was Cassandra, daughter of Priam, princess of Troy. She was given the gift of perfect prophecy by Apollo, and then when she refused him, cursed so that no one would ever believe her. She stood at the gates of Troy and told her people, "Do not bring that horse inside the walls." She screamed it, she begged. She named the exact catastrophe that was coming with absolute precision. They brought the horse inside. Troy burned. Cassandra was right, and being right destroyed her. But here is what almost every retelling of this myth gets wrong, and what this video is going to take apart completely. The curse was not Apollo's punishment, the curse was human nature itself, because across 3,000 years of literature, across the Greeks, and Orwell, and Atwood, and Sophocles, and every culture that has ever put a story on the page, the same pattern appears with such relentless consistency that it stops being a tragedy and starts being a diagnosis. The people who see clearly are punished for it. We dismiss warnings not because we cannot hear them, but because we do not want to. And society systematically silences the ones who are right and calls it madness. All three of these things are happening right now, today, in the institutions around you, in the conversations you are avoiding, in the very structure of how knowledge gets treated when it threatens power. This is the Cassandra paradox, and once you see it, you will find it everywhere. Cassandra's story comes to us primarily through the Oresteia of Aeschylus, written in 458 BC, and through references in Homer's Iliad. But what Aeschylus does with her in the Agamemnon is extraordinary. She arrives in Argos as a war prize, dragged behind Agamemnon's chariot, and she stands before the palace of Clytemnestra, and she sees in her prophetic mind the entire history of violence that has already happened in that house, and the violence that is about to happen. She names it. She describes the murders with a specificity that is almost unbearable. She says, "I will die here. Agamemnon will die here. The one who kills him will be killed." The chorus watches her and says roughly, "She is mad. She is speaking nonsense. She is overwhelmed with grief." And then everything she described happens exactly as she described it. This is the template. And what makes the Cassandra myth so powerful is not the prophecy. It is the mechanism. The specific, repeatable, cross-cultural mechanism by which truth gets dismissed not on its merits, but on the basis of who is speaking it and what accepting it would cost the people who hear it. Psychologists have a name for this mechanism. They call it epistemic cowardice, the deliberate choice to avoid, dismiss, or discredit knowledge that is inconvenient, uncomfortable, or threatening. Not stupidity, not ignorance. Cowardice. The active, motivated refusal to know. And literature has been documenting this cowardice for 3,000 years, from Cassandra to Tiresias, from Tiresias to Winston Smith, from Winston Smith to Offred, from Antigone to every woman who has ever been called hysterical for accurately naming a harm. The Cassandra figures of literature are everywhere, and they share three characteristics so consistent that they form a pattern you can apply once you see it to everything from Greek tragedy to the office meeting you sat through last Tuesday. They see accurately, they speak clearly, and they are not believed. Not because they are wrong, but because being believed would require the people around them to change. To understand the Cassandra myth fully, you have to understand what Apollo's curse actually was, and most people misread it. The common interpretation is that Apollo gave Cassandra the gift of prophecy and then removed the ability to be believed as a punishment for rejecting him. But this reading is too comfortable. It makes the curse exceptional. It makes it something that required a god's intervention. It lets the rest of us off the hook. Read it again, more carefully. Apollo did not invent the mechanism. He just made it permanent. The truth is that human beings have always struggled to believe the person who sees what they do not want to see. Apollo's curse did not create something new, it crystallized something that was already there. In the Agamemnon, when Cassandra stands before the palace and begins to describe the horrors within it, the chorus does not simply disbelieve her, they go through a process. First, they acknowledge that some of what she is saying sounds plausible, then they become uncomfortable, then they rationalize the discomfort away, then they dismiss her as grief-stricken, as foreign, as a woman unhinged by captivity. Notice the sequence. They did not start with dismissal, they started with recognition, and they moved toward dismissal as the truth became more specific, more demanding, more impossible to hold alongside the life they were continuing to live. This is not a mythological phenomenon. This is documented, replicable human psychology. Leon Festinger, who developed the theory of cognitive dissonance in the 1950s, showed that when human beings are presented with information that conflicts with a deeply held belief or a comfortable assumption, they do not simply update the belief, they experience psychological pain. And to relieve that pain, they do one of two things. They change the belief or they discredit the information. Changing the belief is expensive. It requires admitting you were wrong. It requires adjusting your behavior, your relationships, sometimes your entire way of understanding the world. Discrediting the information is cheap. All you have to do is find a reason, any reason, to dismiss the person bringing it. And the reasons are always available. She is too emotional. He has an agenda. They are outsiders. She is young and therefore naive. He is old and therefore out of touch. They are too smart and therefore out of touch with reality. They are not smart enough to understand the full complexity. The reasons are infinite and they all serve the same function. They allow you to reject the content without engaging with it. Sophocles understood this before Festinger had a word for it. In Oedipus Rex, Tiresias is the Cassandra figure. He is the blind prophet who has seen the truth of Oedipus's identity, who comes to the king and tells him exactly who he is and what he has done. Tiresias sees with perfect clarity. He says, "You are the murderer you are looking for. You are the source of the plague on this city." And Oedipus's response is one of the most psychologically authentic moments in all of Greek tragedy. He does not argue with the evidence. He attacks the man. He accuses Tiresias of conspiracy. He says, "You and Creon have conspired to take my throne." He constructs an elaborate counter-narrative in which the truth teller is the villain, in which the prophet's accurate vision is actually motivated deceit, in which seeing becomes evidence of scheming. This is the first weapon used against the Cassandra figure. Not argument, accusation. The truth teller is not wrong. They are corrupt, not mistaken, but malicious. Their clarity becomes evidence of agenda. And notice what this does to the truth itself. The moment Tiresias's motives are in question, the truth he carries is contaminated. It cannot be evaluated on its own merits anymore because it is now wrapped in a dispute about the person who brought it. The content drowns in the attack on the character. 3,000 years later, this is still the primary mechanism. Name any whistleblower in living memory, any person who stood up in a public or private context and named a harm that powerful people were committed to ignoring, and you will find the same pattern. The first response is never engagement with the claim. The first response is always an attack on the person making it, their background, their motives, their mental health, their reliability, their past mistakes, anything that shifts the conversation from what they are saying to who they are, so that by the time the facts are finally examined, if they are examined at all, the person who brought them has already been discredited. The curse is not supernatural, it is structural, and it has been structural for as long as human beings have had something to lose from hearing the truth. But Cassandra is not only a story about how society treats individuals who see clearly. It is also, and perhaps more importantly, a story about the mechanism by which groups of people collectively choose not to know things they are capable of knowing. The Trojans were not stupid, they were not lacking in evidence. The warnings about the horse came from multiple directions. Cassandra, obviously, but also Laocoon, the priest who hurled a spear at the horse and said famously that he feared the Greeks, even bearing gifts, and who was subsequently killed by sea serpents, which the Trojans interpreted as divine punishment for his impiety rather than as confirmation of his correctness. The evidence was there. The warnings were multiple, and the Trojans chose as a collective act to override all of it. Why? Because they had been at war for 10 years. They were exhausted. The prospect that the Greeks had finally given up and left, that the enormous, beautiful wooden structure was a divine offering, an act of surrender by their enemies, was too welcome to examine critically. The desire to be finished, to celebrate, To believe the nightmare was over was so powerful that it functioned as evidence in its own right. The horse looked like an ending, and they needed an ending so badly that they were willing to overlook every signal that it was not. This is what psychologists call motivated reasoning. The conclusion comes first and the reasoning follows, working backward from the desired outcome to find justifications for it. It is not the same as lying to yourself. It does not feel like motivated reasoning from the inside. From the inside, it feels like thinking, like weighing the evidence, like being reasonable. The Trojans were being reasonable within a system of needs and desires that made certain conclusions impossible to reach regardless of the evidence available. George Orwell understood this at the level of his bones, and he encoded it into the most detailed portrait of institutional motivated reasoning in modern literature. In 1984, the party does not simply suppress the truth, it does something far more sophisticated. It creates the conditions under which knowing the truth becomes psychologically almost impossible. Doublethink, the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs simultaneously and to accept both as true, is not portrayed by Orwell as something that requires force to maintain. It requires practice. It requires the active, ongoing participation of the person doing it. Winston Smith spends the novel watching people around him engage in doublethink, not because they are coerced in every individual moment, but because they have internalized the need to not know. They have made not knowing a habit, a reflex. There is a moment in the novel where Orwell describes something he calls crime stop, the faculty of stopping short, as though by instinct, at the threshold of any dangerous thought. The crucial word is instinct. He is describing a trained reflex, a self-censoring mechanism so thoroughly internalized that it operates before consciousness even has the opportunity to engage. You do not decide not to think the dangerous thought. You simply do not think it. The pathway has been closed off so many times that it stops functioning. This is not science fiction. This is a description of how motivated not knowing operates in every institution, every community, every relationship where knowing would require change. The thought that would require you to leave the job stops before it fully forms. The recognition of what is happening in the relationship closes before it reaches language. The implication of the statistic you just read dissolves before it connects to anything actionable. Not because you are weak or dishonest, but because the human mind is extraordinarily good at protecting the systems you depend on from the information that would destabilize them. And here is the part of this that is most important to understand, the part that separates a real engagement with the Cassandra paradox from a comfortable reading of it. The Trojans were not villains, they were not uniquely foolish or uniquely corrupt. They were people under pressure, with desires and fears and a perfectly human tendency to believe what they needed to believe. And this is what makes the myth a tragedy rather than a morality tale. You cannot look at the Trojans and say, I would have been different, because the evidence of 3,000 years of history, of psychology, of literature says, no, you would not have been different. You would have brought the horse inside too, because the Cassandra paradox is not about individual failure. It is about the systematic, structural, almost inevitable tendency of human beings and human institutions to prioritize comfort over clarity, to choose the story that allows life to continue over the story that demands it change. There is one more weapon in the arsenal that gets deployed against the Cassandra figure, and it is the most insidious one of all, because it does not just dismiss the truth teller. It reframes their capacity to see clearly as evidence that they cannot be trusted. It calls the accurate perception madness. Aeschylus's Cassandra is described as raving, as in the grip of frenzy. The Greek word used for her prophetic state is associated with divine possession, with the loss of rational control, and this is not incidental, it is the mechanism. Her accuracy is framed as pathology. She is not wrong, but she is unwell, and therefore her wrongness is presumed without the need to demonstrate it. The truth and the madness arrive together, inseparably entangled, so that anyone who wants to dismiss the truth can do so simply by accepting the diagnosis. Margaret Atwood spent her entire career examining what happens to women who see clearly and speak truly in societies that have decided those capacities are symptoms of disorder. In The Handmaid's Tale, the entire apparatus of Gilead depends on a specific act of collective not knowing among the women who have chosen to collaborate with it. The wives and the aunts and the Marthas have all to varying degrees accepted a story about the world that requires them to not see what is directly in front of them. And the women who refuse this not seeing, who insist on naming what is happening, are handled in precisely the Cassandra manner. They are declared unwell, deviant, unwomen, and they are removed. Offred is a Cassandra figure in the most precise sense. She sees, she remembers, she carries within her the before, the record of the world as it was, which the regime requires everyone to forget, and her refusal to forget is itself treated as a symptom. The women who have adapted, who have accepted the story, regard her inner resistance not as clarity, but as a dangerous instability. The system does not need to prove she is wrong. It needs only to demonstrate that her kind of knowing is incompatible with the social order. But Atwood is doing something even more specific than portraying political repression. She is showing how the pathologizing of accurate perception operates at the level of interpersonal dynamics, at the level of ordinary human relationships and ordinary social structures. Offred's situation is an extreme case, but the mechanism is not extreme at all. It is ordinary. It is the mechanism deployed in every context where someone with power needs to neutralize someone with clarity. Think about what happens when a person in an organization names a problem that the organization has decided not to see. Not a small procedural complaint, but a substantive, well-evidenced identification of something genuinely wrong. The first response, as we established, is an attack on their motives. But if that fails, if their motives cannot be convincingly impeached, the next response is an attack on their judgment. They are taking it too personally. They are not seeing the full picture. They are too invested in this particular issue to be objective. They lack perspective. They are, in the clinical language deployed in modern organizational life, not a team player, which is to say they are not committed to the group's shared project of not knowing. This is the workplace language for what the Greeks called madness, and it works. With exactly the same precision for exactly the same reason. It does not engage with the content of the claim. It repositions the person making the claim as someone whose claims cannot be trusted. And once that repositioning succeeds, the content does not need to be addressed. It simply needs to be weighted out. Jean Anouilh rewrote The Myth of Antigone in 1944 during the Nazi occupation of France in a way that makes the Cassandra structure almost unbearably explicit. Antigone insists on performing the burial rites for her brother, which Creon has forbidden. She knows the consequences, she does them anyway, and Creon's response is not to argue that her brother is undeserving of burial. His response is to tell her with something approaching genuine compassion that she is being unreasonable, that she is young and idealistic and does not understand the practical necessities of power, that her refusal to accept the world as it is itself a kind of madness. And what Anouilh makes devastating is that Creon is not entirely wrong. He is not a cartoon villain. He is a person who has made peace with the compromises required to maintain order, who has decided that survival requires a certain deliberate blindness, and who cannot comprehend why anyone would choose clarity over survival. From inside his system, Antigone's clarity looks like death wish, and in a sense it is, because clarity in a system committed to not knowing is incompatible with continuation. The Cassandra figures who survive are the ones who learn to be silent, and the ones who speak are the ones who are destroyed, and the system continues because this is functionally how it is designed to work. Here is where the ancient myth becomes something you need to sit with in a specific and personal way, because the Cassandra paradox is not a description of exceptional circumstances. It is not about dictatorships and Greek tragedies and fictional dystopias. It is a description of the ordinary social mechanics by which truth gets suppressed in every institution, every community, and every relationship where knowing would require the people with power to change. Think about climate science. The evidence was not ambiguous in 1988 when James Hansen testified before the United States Senate and told them with the specificity of someone who had studied it for decades exactly what was coming and approximately when. The response was not a serious engagement with the evidence. The response was 30 years of organised, funded, deliberate campaign to discredit the people carrying the information, to frame them as alarmists, to position their certainty as evidence of ideological motivation rather than scientific rigour. The pattern is Oedipus and Tiresias, translated into the language of congressional testimony and think tank white papers. The truth teller accused of conspiracy, the content buried under the attack on the messenger. Think about what happens in organisations when someone with less institutional power than the people around them names something that is genuinely, substantively wrong. Not wrong in a technical or procedural sense, wrong in a moral or structural sense. The promotion process that systematically disadvantages certain groups. The practice that is harming clients. The leadership decision that everyone privately knows is a mistake. Watch what happens to the person who names it. Watch how quickly the conversation moves from what they said to how they said it, to their tone, to their approach, to whether they went through the right channels, to whether they are a collaborative member of the team. All of this is designed to accomplish one thing: to make the content of the claim impossible to evaluate fairly by surrounding it with questions about the character and judgment of the person who raised it. And think about what the Cassandra paradox demands of you personally, because this is the part that is hardest to sit with. You are not only potentially in the position of Cassandra, the clear-sighted one who is dismissed, you are also regularly in the position of the Trojans, the person who has been offered accurate information about something you did not want to know and who found a way to not know it. The relationship that someone who loved you tried to warn you about and you found reasons to dismiss their concern. The decision you made that several people around you quietly identified as a mistake, and you told yourself they did not have access to the full picture. The thing you have been not thinking, the door in your mind that has closed so many times it no longer opens, the Orwellian crime stop that operates before you even know it is operating. The Cassandra paradox is not only about what we do to the people who see clearly, it is also about what we do to ourselves. The ways in which we have become our own censors, our own silencers, our own dismissers of the difficult truth. The ways in which we have made peace with not knowing because knowing would require a change we are not ready to make. Aeschylus wrote the Agamemnon not as a story about a cursed princess. He wrote it as a mirror. He put Cassandra on stage and let her speak the truth that everyone already knew, that the audience watching had come prepared to hear, and he showed them the mechanism by which a crowd of people who have heard the truth can still find a way to not receive it, because the Trojans are not the villains of this story. They are the audience. They are us. Sitting there, watching the person point at the smoke, finding reasons, making peace, deciding that the discomfort of knowing is greater than the catastrophe of not knowing, right up until the moment it is not. Cassandra did not need Apollo's curse to be ignored. She needed only to be right about something the people around her needed not to be true. That is the only condition that has ever been required. That is the only condition that is ever required. The person who sees the fire before the building is ready to acknowledge it. The person who names the pattern that the institution depends on not naming. The person who holds with precise and accurate specificity the knowledge that would cost everyone around them something they are not ready to pay. We did not stop burning our Cassandras. We got more sophisticated about how we do it. We stopped calling it madness and started calling it lacking perspective. We stopped calling it heresy and started calling it not being a team player. We stopped stoning them in the public square and started quietly making their professional lives impossible, or simply ignoring what they said until it was too late for it to matter and then pretending they had never said it. Troy is not a warning about wooden horses. Troy is a warning about the extraordinary human capacity to be in possession of a truth and to choose collectively, deliberately, with full awareness of what we are doing, even as we refuse to acknowledge that we are doing it, not to know it. The question Aeschylus leaves you with is not, why did Cassandra fail to make them listen? That is the comfortable question. That puts the problem on her delivery, her approach, her failure to find the right words or the right moment or the right audience. The real question is harder than that. When was the last time someone tried to tell you the true thing and you found a reason not to hear it? And what is still burning because of that?